sorry, man. I'm sorry. You gotta leave that place is looking skanga, man.
I mean, yeah, I think like Walton said, like we are in a moment right now where things are happening on our borders, in South Africa particularly, like, and in Eswatini specifically. Um, I have to confess that it was very weird to go on the internet and read things about the history of Eswatini, but still see like these kinds of the ways in which that formation of that state had so many different names over times. Like at some point it was inside of South Africa. Like it had its own, like it was part of what was called the Transvaal colony or something. And then it like became Swaziland, and then it became Eswatini. And I mean, we can talk about that, but yeah, all that to say that what's going on there now is crazy, and really important, I guess, for the region. I don't know what you guys think, but
I think
today we're discussing monarchs, absolute monarchs, monarchy, and there's different versions of monarchy in the world, but the one we're touching on in this episode is an absolute monarch, meaning, for those of you who don't know or might not know, if we take the British Empire or the UK, and they have a monarchy. There's a queen, there's a royal family, but they also have elected democracy structure with parties, and citizens can vote for their elected officials. And we have the Labour Party, we have different parties in the UK. With the absolute monarchy, from my understanding, in previously known as Swaziland, now it's Eswatini, is that there is one rule, one person that calls the shots, makes the decrees. The election, you elect officials, but those officials have been pre-selected by the king himself. So you don't have much choice of who to put in these positions, because you just need to choose who goes where. The officials already chosen. So that's what we're going to touch upon today, and I hope you guys can also help me with some of the stuff I was confused about. And monarchy is being contested in Eswatini by locals for various reasons, and it's not something that has just popped up in the last couple of months. This has been going on for long, for years and years, and it's always been quashed through decrees and through overnight laws. And I think a few incidents arose in the last month or so that just people had enough, and so they wanted democracy. What that looks like could be a blend of what England probably has or some other European states, or it could just be a straight up democracy, but they want something different because clearly what has been happening has not been working.
I think that just before you go, Walton, I see you, and I just want to quickly say this while we're on this thing. I think it's important to distinguish between absolute monarchy, which is what Eswatini is at the moment, and constitutional monarchy, which is what the United Kingdom is. In which case, the Queen is the head of state, but does not really have any. The Queen represents sovereign power, whereas in the absolute monarchy, like the king is power.
Is absolute power.
Like he is absolute power in a very crude kind of way. Yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there in the context of.
Yeah. And so I mean, thank you both for that. Thank you, Lee, for that. Like, kind of concise defining, but then also Stalin for expanding that a bit. I think the one thing that I'm kind of like that I also want to touch on maybe is the role of South Africa in all of this, or the lack of a role of South Africa in all of this. Like, what are we doing? What are we not doing? But then I also want to kind of touch on what are some of the internal things that have been going on in Eswatini in the lead up to revolt, like kind of protest action and resistance to oppression that's going on at the moment. Because there was, there were a lot of political moves that were happening. Their prime minister died within the last like 6 months or something like that, and an interim kind of official was appointed, the former deputy prime minister. The king has, like, has always drawn his prime ministers from the line of the Dlamini family. So there's not only absolute monarchy, but there is like an institutionalized nepotism in terms of like the performative leadership in the country. And along with that goes deep class politics and deep class divides. Because now, if you are a born Dlamini, you already have a certain status in the country. You already eligible to become a high-ranking political official and all of these things. So it's not just that the king is the absolute monarch, but the king is also cementing and like reinstitutionalizing class structures in the country. And we have to really analyze that, we have to think about the ways in which the British also operated administratively during colonialism, but then also South Africa's colonial and apartheid influence on Swaziland and that whole region, and what South Africa can do now. We need to discuss what South Africa can do, should be doing now, and can be doing now. And then one last concern I have is people are getting killed, and that should already be like the last line for the world to say, like, we need to someone needs to intervene and help the situation. But I think there's another line that's also constantly being crossed now, and that is the line of the arrest and torture and sometimes assassination of journalists.
There's two South African
Which,
journalists that's being detained there at the
yeah,
moment. So what are we
which is deeply concerning. I think we don't want to exceptionalize journalists, but I think they occupy a certain role in society that we have to protect in order to, I don't know, to function.
Internet is cut off or social media is closed.
Social media is
and
closed.
Journalists are being locked up. There's two South African journalists that were detained, and like the South African government or the SABC, or I don't know who, but like the comms department, like they haven't put out a statement. They haven't like taken a stance. And I just want to know, what are the negotiations, or what is the talks, what is the diplomacy, and what is South Africa's diplomacy with Eswatini?
The interesting thing for me about the whole internet being down and all of that stuff is that the biggest internet service provider in Eswatini is MTN.
And yeah.
And the local board chairperson, and you're gonna have to forgive me about like not remembering their name, but he is very closely related to the king as well. So the decision to cut off the internet was basically decided by the royal family.
Yeah.
And South African corporations have a large foothold in Eswatini as well. We've got a massive trade agreement with them. Not only does South Africa also give aid, but there's import-export business going into there. And I mean, them being one of our closest geographic neighbors, it stands to reason that South African industry and the economy is going to work hand in hand with Eswatini. And I think that it's almost, the silence is almost deafening from Southern African companies that do trade with Eswatini about what's happening there. And I think it's once again, it all comes down to class and to capital, because what do you lose when a monarch is overthrown? You lose that protection for your business.
Yeah, I think, yeah. So
Jeez, yeah.
You know, I think there's like
Hmm.
major corporations in South Africa that are dealing with Eswatini at the moment, but I think one of the major state arms, which is Eskom, has dealings with Eswatini. Like with there's there historically has been like sale of electricity. I don't know if that's still 100% like a thing that's happening right now, but it's not just private corporations, you know, that are like benefiting from this relationship, but that they are state-owned enterprises or partially state-owned enterprises that are uh, um, yeah, trading with with the government of Eswatini. I don't know. I'm just so I'm honestly I'm trying not to swear so much. I'm just really scared
Wow.
of the okay, so first of all, I'm scared about the underreporting of the extent of the killing that's going on at the moment, because we're already getting reports that it's more people being killed
Yeah.
than is being reported by the government. Uh, the current prime minister is releasing very timid statements about, you know, we need to be careful about violence and stuff like that. But I'm really afraid about of what is currently happening to these people, uh, and the potential for this to be a long-standing spate of violence, like over months, and really what that would look like for them, because it's a small nation.
Yeah.
Mm.
It's a nation where there is a lot that needs to be done in terms of providing healthcare for folks, and so this is just going to exacerbate all of that.
Like
Uh,
they received fund, they received, I don't know, a couple, don't know if it's like 18 or 16 million from the IMF for COVID relief and all that. It's same story. It's not there. 90% of their of their imports come from South Africa. So there is a relationship, big corporate relationship that goes on there,
is that
like
a
you
real
said.
number? 90%?
Yeah, 90%. You can check it up. Maybe
Holy
correct me as
shit!
well.
No. I no. I trust you. I just like
Um,
I did not look that up.
play
Holy fuck!
like 90% of the imported goods. Yeah, sorry, 90% of the imports come from South Africa.
Yeah.
Um, and so that there is a very strong corporate relationship there, and we don't know who's involved where, like Enrique just spoke to us now about the MTN situation. So I'm with you, Walton. That fear is very present. It's very deep. And they've gotten away with it many times before. This time it's not working though, because people are now just reached it. The top. Like their state employees haven't even been paid. They don't get paid regularly. Teachers don't even get a salary sometimes. Like they need to wait months and months. They are I won't say they're underfunded. There's just there is money, but because of the lavish lifestyle, because of the nepotism that happens in these royal circles, that the money doesn't go down to the people. There's no trickle down, none whatsoever. And people have just and have had enough, I think. And there's a lot of the young people on the ground as well. That's what
Yeah.
I'm seeing. And there's a lot of young people on the ground who's getting arrested, detained, beaten up.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, democracy is not perfect, right? It has its flaws. And I was reading one thing now about one of the people from Podemo, the political party that's coming up, like because to have a political party is illegal. Um, so they talk a lot on South African TV as well. He was saying, look, your democracy is not perfect, but they need something different. And if they want to try a democracy model with a constitutional monarchy, like Aiden said, then they can try. But like this is not working. But because of this absolute power that they've been wielding, I don't think the royal family is willing to let that go. And
How
obviously,
how have they
they will.
kept hold of it for so long? Like how has that family been? How has that family been able to hold on to that absolute monarchy for so long?
Very easily,
culture.
very easily. No, it's not even traditional culture. It's the structure of customary law.
Yeah.
It's also the reason why South Africa doesn't feel like it needs to challenge like Mswati the third, because it's the same. It comes from the same history that put together the kind of tribal authorities of that underscored or underpinned the Bantustan system. Like, it sounds very crude for me to put it like that, but customary law has a particular history in this region, and eSwatini should not be excluded from that history. I think South Africa and eSwatini share that history very closely. And so, like, I think you can't. I mean, I was reading up before we had this session, and the long history of eSwatini is tied to this idea of the Mfikane and this idea of Shaka and the Zulu kind of disruption in that space. And we know that part of that debate is also part of a colonial alibi for the impact of colonialism. So, and it's also used to construct certain kind of tribal fixed traditional identities that don't change.
Because to challenge that is to challenge culture or tradition, or like to challenge the monarchy is to go back on cultural values and to challenge that kind of deep centered identity attributes to certain cultures. Is that what you're trying to say? Like, it's just like a no, we don't challenge that. Like, we don't.
Yeah, and it is a logic that is used to make the argument that to be anti the monarchy or to be anti the king is to be anti a kind of Swazi identity or anti I mean, and we faced this in South Africa before. We faced this in the kind of ethno-nationalism that we saw in the 80s, and we're seeing it now again with Zuma.
We're seeing it now. Okay, thank you for
saying it right
that.
now. We're seeing it now in KZN, and it's a problem. It's a problem. I mean, this is like the ethno-nationalism is scary. And I think that it's something that needs to be addressed. I also want to talk about, just quickly, I just want to talk about the kind of quiet diplomacy.
Why?
The quiet diplomacy of South Africa.
I don't like that.
And
South Africa
I think it's something that happened after 1994, with the idea that before that, the South African state had such a strong military presence in Southern Africa and the SADC region. So maybe the ANC was like, okay, let's tone it down. Let's follow this whole example of negotiated settlement. Let's go out into the wider world, and let's no longer release our military forces into the Congo, for example. Let's send our peacekeeping forces. So there's like a whole change in the way the language operates there as well. And it's worrying. I mean, it's worrying. What does it mean for the South African state to take a decisive stance and to do something about the crisis in eSwatini? Like, what does that look like? What does that mean?
Honestly, I think in the post-apartheid moment, there's also the negotiations, obviously, that we have to take into account, and there's also the requirements from like World Bank, IMF, international lenders who do not want South Africa to go into other countries and say like, hey, we're gonna support you, we're gonna support your radical movement, which would mean anti-US imperialism a lot of the time, or like anti-CIA influence, or just anti-capitalism in general. So for South Africa, for instance, to go to Mozambique and say, I'm not even talking about Mozambique now, I'm talking like Mozambique post the assassination of Samora Machel, and in that like 2 decades after that, when things really were in a bad state, South Africa had the opportunity to go in there and say like, look, we're going to support the radical socialist cause, but because that would conflict with the interest of the people giving South Africa loans and imposing all of these sanctions on us in terms of what the kind of diplomacy we can practice. I mean, this is speculation on my part, but I suspect that international, like Western involvement, capitalist involvement, is also part of the reasoning as to why certain types of diplomacy was not practiced. I mean, we saw it with Zimbabwe not that long ago. The way South Africa did nothing, like we did.
Yeah.
Zimbabwe was going
Yeah.
crazy, and we
I
did
mean,
nothing.
We
I mean, a
forget
part of
who
it is
helped
also
us.
we can't go in and we can't go in and do anything because as a sovereign state, we, by virtue of the unspoken rules of the global like community of nations or whatever, we can't go in and like that's a challenge to another sovereign, a state sovereignty. That's in effect an invasion for us to go in there. And so,
That's true.
so diplomatically, that wouldn't make sense. But for example, there have been calls for South Africa to close down the eSwatini embassy. That's a very strong move.
Yeah, that's a statement. That's a statement because we'll do that.
We could also impose sanctions.
Yeah.
As the linchpin of the entire economy of Eswatini, if we had to just say no, done, sorry, sanctions, we are cutting off the country now, like that
because
could force a hand.
With the,
that could force a hand to some degree, I think. I don't know.
Because we did that with Israel, with like, you know, the president came out with what's happening in Palestine, the Israeli oppression, and the ambassador has been spoken to, recalled, you know, like we've made these moves before, you know, so like just by our borders, I know it's a sovereign state, but we have a responsibility to Southern African states as well, because we must never forget also when South Africa needed assistance, places like Mozambique, Zimbabwe rallied the call, you know, and you like, yes, it's a sovereign state, but can you just now sit back and see this happen? Can you just watch it and see like the people getting killed, literally? So there needs to be some sort of action. And if it's diplomacy at first, then fine, do something, like recall the ambassador, speak up, do something, because Southern Africa is watching, like, and they rally to us, they look at us, and like their problems will quickly become our problems because we share borders. I mean, there is a runoff that's gonna happen.
One can make the same argument about any other any other space in Africa that requires an act of solidarity from South Africa. Like, I can't even think of an example now, which shows my South African exceptionalism. But the point that I'm making is that, you know, in other situations, no, maybe not as close to home as this, but in other situations, what would it have meant for South Africa to go in there and to do something? Do you know what I'm saying?
And I think I need to like backtrack a bit, because I was talking about, like, I was speaking in the language of we're gonna go in there as if we're gonna like send military forces or something like that, which is not what I, you know, it's not what I had meant to, you know, be going to. I think organizations, or like radical organizations in South Africa, if they so choose to send people in and say, go fight alongside, you know, the people of Eswatini, then that is their choice. But I think as a state, like, you know, South Africa has to be more careful than that. You're absolutely right. What I do want to like kind of think about is a different kind of Pan-Africanism that can foster this type of relationship where we can hold our neighbors accountable and they can hold us accountable. And if it comes to the point where we need to say, okay, you know, we're gonna pull trade, or we're gonna stop sending things, or whatever the case may be, then so be it. But I think like there needs to operate. We need to start thinking about like how we're gonna operate in a pan-Africanist sense outside of the state, like extra stately. The state doesn't even have to be involved in this kind of pan-Africanism that I'm trying to imagine and think about right now. It has to be organized in a different way. And I, yeah, you know, we can push diplomatically, but I think the pushes have to come from multiple angles. It has to come from academia. It has to come from, while the private sector still exists, it has to come from the private sector. Um, Although we will never be able to trust the private sector in the capitalist world, but you know, we can put pressure on them. But like, you know, at the end of the day, I think the main thing is to develop the kinds of lines that pan-Africanists were thinking about, like post 1950s, 1960s, on the continent, but also in the Black diaspora, like people like Walter Rodney, you know, coming here, Kwame Ture, and so on. These people were like in Maria Makeba, people were thinking about what does it mean to be a Pan-Africanist outside of thinking about the state as the thing that can operate our Pan-Africanism. And so, I don't know.
I know what you're getting at.
I'm saying a lot of words, but I
I know
fucking
what you're
know.
getting at, because with the state comes legislation, comes identity, comes budget, it's all these things that will stifle and have their own version of pan-Africanism that suits that state. So if we take it down to people or citizen level, there's less red tape and less obstruction in order to get things going. And in that Pan-African idea, I think you'll have less resistance, you'll have more cooperation, and more shit getting done. Um, you know, because there's nothing to gain when it comes to political parties, prime ministers, presidents in power, because that is a threat to them. You must understand, like, some of these states, Pan-Africanism, as how it was described in the 70s and even 80s, was in today's world, that is a threat to a lot of these these economies and these power structures.
Right.
Because you look at the kingdom of Eswatini, that they position themselves to say you can only live with us being in rule. Like, you can't bite the hand that feeds you. But in the model that you propose, Walton, is that no, we take the state out of it. There needs to be something else. So that is a threat to them, because they don't, the citizens or the people of the country don't have to rely on the monarchy anymore. If there's more cooperation, more work being done on the citizen level throughout African countries. But then you cut the internet, and then what?
Yeah, so okay, yeah, you know, so just to try and be more clear than I was earlier, also, like, you absolutely rightly, and then I just want to add that I don't know, I just think that organizationally, like, building solidarity among organizations, firstly within a country and then within neighboring countries that can assist each other. So if we're thinking about like uh, a small farming co-op community, right? And you know, they've got like multiple crops, they've got excess, and they want to trade within the community, but you know, there's enough for the season. So like, let's have a conversation with someone over the border in Zimbabwe and hear like what their needs are, and can we help them out. And like, it becomes a politic of empathy and a politic of love, as opposed to a politic of economy and a politic of capital. And so like, I know that sounds idealistic, but I'm not trying to be idealistic. I know there's going to be bloodshed, because I like states want absolute power at the end of it. At the end of the day, political parties want power. They're not interested in. We constantly hear this line like the party is more important than the people. We hear that in relation to the ANC. Here in the States, we hear that in relation to the Democratic Party, the Republican Party. It doesn't matter what the people need. It matters what feeds the purpose of the political party. I know Aiden had something
Yeah.
to say. Sorry for jumping in there, Aiden.
No, I think MK wanted to say something.
Oh, sorry, my bad.
Andrik wanted to say something.
um, look, I think Walton, to your point and pretty much your plight, I guess, is the fact that there is hope for that kind of thing, because we now luckily live in a time in Africa where the majority of people, especially the youth, are connected to one another without borders, right? Digitally. And with the situation that's happening in Eswatini right now, there are South African organizations, there are Zimbabwean organizations I've seen from Nigeria as well, where people are coming together and making sure that the situation is in people's consciousness. Whatever they can get out of there, like in the 70s and the 80s in apartheid South Africa, if you could get like a sliver of a video out to the States and to the UK to show this is what's really happening. This is not the propaganda that they're showing you. That is actually happening. This is the real stuff that is happening digitally now. And I know it's not a solution. I know that's not the ideal kind of Pan-Africanism that we want, but it's one small part of
it's part of it.
Yeah, what I feel like the future of it is going to be like, because now we can. That is a small sliver of what the ideal is going to be like. Where luckily we have technology now. Luckily we have a foothold on each other's devices. And I think that is going to be kind of the starting point, because now revolutions and things happen and start and end digitally. You know, I think that's the future of Pan-Africanism, I feel.
Right. And I think there's also an inherent danger in that, and we saw that with the Arab Spring, and we saw the kind of a capacity for the West to infiltrate any kind of like meaningful people-led revolutionary action. It was a very precarious situation. We saw it in Zim, the establishment of solidarity there. What I do want to also point at, and again, this is something that Aiden knows way more about than me, is solidarity between South Africans, like Black South Africans across the board. I'm talking about, colored, Black, everybody, with the people of Eswatini, and like how are we gonna traverse that very much colonial manufactured tribalism that exists now. Because within our solidarity, we're gonna have disagreements, and that's absolutely fine. But I think the main goal has to be, we have to have the same goal. If we still, arguing around factional lines, borders drawn by British colonial officials, and yeah, I don't know. It's just I just feel like I feel like it's doable. Obviously, it's doable. I have to believe that, but I just feel like that's work that we are not currently taking into account in a very deeply serious way. Because to have true solidarity, we would have to collapse a lot of these manufactured tribalisms. I'm not saying abandon your identity, abandon what you believe you are. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying like for true solidarity to go toward the work of liberation from, in this case, the Eswatini monarchy, there has to be a certain kind of loosening, collapsing of these fictitious, you know, manufactured boundaries. I say fictitious loosely because it's very
Yeah,
real.
we must be very
It's
careful.
very real. It's very real to people.
I think remember on campus, right? Remember the SRC and how come SRC voting time, you had the Pan-Africanists, you had the ANC guys, and that, I think once it becomes politicized, you can't, once cultural differences and identity and that becomes politicized, then you have a problem. I think you can't now say we're all the same, because what happens to my Xhosa friends and my Zulu friend? Like, must they lose their identity? Must they, I think it's a mixture between not politicizing it, acceptance, and coexistence. I don't know, man. It sounds airy fairy when I'm speaking about it coming out my mouth.
Well,
but
we have to have aspirations though. Like I know what you mean.
Erasure is what my fear is. Like then it starts again, like cultural erasure. Like, like we need to kind of understand we're multicultural. Yes, we're multicultural, but we don't form our politics around that. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's the Zulu party, that's the Xhosa party, that's the, I don't know if you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah,
I think once we politicize cultural norms and identity,
I feel like Aiden is gonna come with the hits now. Bro.
But I'm ready. I'm nervous.
I'm kind of nervous.
Not to drop a citation, but
drop it. We need the citations. I think people want to have the citations.
There's this video that I always like. I really like.
We'll
it's a little
link.
snippet of I'm going to include a link in the show notes. Yeah, it's a little snippet from a Stuart Hall lecture. And what he talks about, he says, race is one of the great classificatory systems of the world. Mm. And then I read somewhere else where someone says the thing that Europe gave us, or the thing that colonialism gave us, was taxonomy. It was a way to inscribe difference, right? So when we think about what does it mean to build solidarity, what you're really asking is, how do you get over that? How do you transcend the kind of inscribing of difference, the kind of classificatory systems that we're forced to think into, like, for example, ethno-linguistic groupings of people, right? Like, when did language become an identity? When? Yeah. Do you know what I'm saying? And how does that now,
I'm Afrikaans.
So now language is an identity, right? I'm a Afrikaans. What? Yeah. I'm a Afrikaans. Therefore, now I cannot be a Xhosa, for example. So when I want to think about how it is I enter into a kind of relationship, or how I build community with someone else, that door is closed. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Like, purely on a linguistic level. Yeah. Do you know what I'm saying? I feel like I can't, I have to take isiXhosa as a third additional language. Think about that logic, even at school, right? Yeah. We learned it in that way. You learn about how to immediately you setting up. So to add on to what Lee was saying as well, we need a multiculturalism, yes, to a certain degree, but we need a multiculturalism that's not like that idea of these kinds of rigid silos in which we don't need a rainbow nation, in other words, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
We need something that can transcend beyond that. And I think this is where Walton might be more instructive, in the sense of what does it mean to have a Pan-African solidarity around the shared experience of Blackness, right? Yeah. And the shared experience of Blackness is tied to the centralized power of the state. The state centralizes power, and who are the bodies that experience that power violently? It's Black bodies, universally, across the board, for the last for the long 21st century and for the longer 20th century. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, and so what does it mean now to act on that? You know, what does it mean to start there? Yeah, and that's not to sound cynical
Sure.
or like
No,
pessimistic, but
I don't
like,
think that's
You're
cynical or
building a
pessimistic.
mountain for
Sorry,
us.
go on ahead and sorry.
no, that's all that I wanted to say.
Yeah.
Like, I was reading up now while I was listening to you guys. I was reading up on the first Pan African Conference in 1900, right? And this Henry Sylvester Williams guy, who's like a lawyer in from Trinidad, right? And his whole idea, he sets it up. He sets this meeting up in 1897 in direct response to the Berlin Conference of 1884,
Yeah.
right? And he sets it up because he says, like, guys, Europe is like, they are coming together to do things on this continent. Like, we all have some sort of connection here. Like, whether we are in Trinidad or whether we are in like Benin, like we have the shared like universal thing
Yeah.
that we can, and that we need to come together, and now we need to build up a defense because
Yeah.
this thing is gaining traction.
And
So
the
what does it
idea-
mean to take that idea now and to say, okay, do you know what I'm saying, to run with it and to produce something? I don't know, like that's where I think we need to,
I
like,
agree.
that's where the work needs to be done.
I agree.
And I just interject here because I think the idea was like the thing of what Walton said about borders, transcend borders. We must understand how those borders came to be. The idea was to split Africa up into these small states where they cannot have, they have their bargaining power, international bargaining power was so weak that if you don't take this money for this amount of crops that we need, we're just going to go to your neighbor. And so the bargaining power of small independent African states was so weak that they would just take whatever they got. The power comes in the unity of these small states, these small countries in Africa. And I think what is important is to go back to that, to say, hey guys, we need to kind of work together, because they're just playing us against each other. Number one, that's that they just play us against each other. And to keep it small, to keep it separate, to fund monarchies, you must understand, like, it's funded internationally to keep it in place, because that's how international trade benefits from African countries with absolute rule or military rule. They don't want to see a unification, a pan-Africanist economy, because that would upset the status quo. And that's a threat to capitalism and Western capitalism. And and
you know,
East,
sorry. And even okay,
like he's like China, you know, like we always talk about the West, and but you know, they've learned a lot of things from from their Western cohorts. So that's another thing you need to be vigilant of. Like, no matter who comes, we need to be ready. Africa needs to sort ourselves out internally first. South Africa, as Walton says, like, we can't go have pan-Africanism on the continent when we don't have it at home. So I think, like, that is the first step. And it's easier said than done. You guys just painted a massive mountain.
Isaac Newton said in that documentary about his life, he said, why would you want to be in the minority? It's a klein majority. Why would you want to why?
Why would you
want to be? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, is there a way that we can, like, is there an idea of the majority like that? Do you know what I'm saying? That's Pan-African, that we can all kind of lay claim to, and
exactly.
And
I mean, I'm fortunate. I hate that I had to do coursework for my PhD here in the States, but I'm very grateful for one course in particular by Professor Bogues at Brown. And a lot of that course was just about reading, you know, what's considered like important texts in the Afrikaner world. So texts of people who find themselves in the diaspora, descendants of enslaved people, and so on. And a lot of them are writing back to Africa, like constantly writing back to Africa, not in a pining kind of idealized way, but to say we have been stolen from that place, brought here to make money for people on a whole other continent of white people. What can we do now in the place that we are at that will aid in the progression of the people of the continent of Africa? Like, that's how they were thinking. That's how Du Bois was thinking. That's how Walter Rodney is thinking, Claudia Jones. All of these people are thinking about, they think, of course, they're thinking about how do I improve the material conditions for the black people living in Trinidad today, in Tobago, in Guyana, in the United States, Brazil, wherever. That, of course, they're thinking about that, but they're not thinking about that in isolation of the continent of Africa. And Africa has to be doing that for itself, but also for the diaspora as well. Like, we need to be, as Africans on the continent, we need to be thinking about Africans elsewhere as well, and be writing towards them and have them write towards us, and we have this cross conversation. The thing is, like, Pan-Africanism doesn't always have to be direct trade. It can be a sharing of ideas. It doesn't always have to be direct action. It can be a sharing of lecture notes, of pamphlets, of like a podcast where we take very seriously the conditions that people are living in. The other day I was thinking about, like, why does nobody think about the conditions of black people in Argentina? And that's because Argentina succeeded in creating this image of a white nation. They don't even think that there are indigenous people in Argentina. So the indigenous people are erased. The black people, the African Argentines that call themselves Afro-Argentine, are completely erased from any imaginary, not just in the region but globally. We don't think, we think Argentina is a white country because of, like, the fucking Spanish, but then also all the Germans that came after World War II. All I'm saying is, like, Pan-Africanism can take many forms, and it can take many, it can operate with many mechanisms, and it's flawed, but it has to be like a constantly changing system. For instance, we cannot think about Pan-Africanism if we don't think about like femicide on the continent, if we don't think about anti-LGBTQ IA plus sentiment and violence on the continent, which is often retributive violence, or this kind of idea of transformational violence, or like, if I beat you up or sexually assault you, then you're gonna turn straight or whatever. We cannot have a Pan-Africanism absent of those things, and those are going to be hard conversations to have, because people hold hard and fast to religious ideas, to ideas that were really brought here. There's a lot of discrimination on the continent. I'm not denying that, but so much was brought by the British and the French into legislation around sexuality and expressions of sexuality, where things were not as firm. Like, they just were not as firm as that in the past.
I mean, it's the invention of tradition, right? Like,
right.
We talk about like gender on this continent is we suffer with a certain history of the invention of tradition, like, and it's violent, like, it's so violent. I mean, one of the big critiques, just to bring it back to the eSwatini conversation for a minute, one of the big critiques of the South African media was, like, when it's the Reed dance, then it's like da holala, like, then South African journalists are there, like, live on the front scene, and nobody's questioning this practice that is so, like, violent towards women's bodies in that space. And so you're absolutely right, Walton. I think I mean, we need to talk about femicide, and we need to talk about gender. I mean, it's a big thing.
So what I understand from what you guys are saying, all these things don't operate in a vacuum, or they don't
Right.
operate independently. You talk about predatory capitalism, you talk about imperialism, you talk about white supremacy, you talk about Pan-Africanism, you talk about femicide, you talk about these things. Pan-Africanism and the type of Pan-Africanism that you are speaking about touches on all these things. It can show itself, or it can manifest through these different mediums. And you need to be open to that. You know what I mean? You can't operate independently if you are just writing to speak to the people, or represent people in Black and oppressed people and indigenous people in Argentina.
Argentina,
Argentina.
yeah,
Argentina.
definitely.
My brain.
That's what we, bruh. I know exactly what
Yeah.
happened to your brain.
I caught my mouth stopped to Argentine. But what I mean is, like, then if someone comes to you and says, hey, look here, but there's anti-gay laws in other African countries, like, would you like to cooperate on a writing piece regarding this? It's all oppression that's brought from systems abroad, that's manifested themselves, and they are employed to keep people in power and keep other people oppressed.
Right.
So
Yeah,
it can't
and-
operate in a vacuum. It doesn't operate independently either. Like, these things are broad. These concepts of Black liberalism and Pan-Africanism on the continent and the diaspora.
I do want to say that I think, like, any structure of power that operates on the authority of a very small group of people is going to result in some form of repression at the very least, and oppression at its worst. And this is why I just named Pan-Africanism as the one thing, because it's the one thing that I think about constantly. Maybe I don't think about it in the traditional terms of, like, the 1970s or something like that, where it was like about establishing nation states.
I think at that time it was necessary.
It was necessary. They were very serious. Kwame Nkrumah was serious about establishing a nation state. Great leader, brilliant mind, but couldn't think beyond the nation state at that time, because that's the tools and the mechanisms they had at hand. So when I say Pan-Africanism, I don't necessarily mean that. I mean a more, for lack of a better word, a more horizontal kind of relational politics of empathy. It's a thing I said earlier also, but like a kind of relational politics of empathy, something where your concern, your primary concern is the liberation of your fellow person. And it shouldn't, and I use the term empathy because it will not contain the things we use to discriminate against each other. So, like, it will be absent of gender or sex or any of those things, because it is a true aspiration to have liberation for all of us. I'm not saying we're not gonna think about gender or sex or any of those things, but I think, like, your politics of empathy really has to come from a kind of a thought through philosophy of sentiment and, like, relation. I don't know what the
It sounds fluffy. You know what I mean?
It sounds fluffy, and I'm fine with that. Like, I'm also
I know.
It's not fluffy at all. I think it's
what's
great.
needed.
I think it makes perfect sense. Like, I don't think it's fluffy. I don't shoot yourself down. Like, I think it's perfectly formulated. It's I think it works.
Thanks. Yeah.
And like Drake said, like, it's going to be more digital. The only problem with that, like, because, like, you're talking about open source, talking about, like, lecture notes or videos to, but the state controls borders and it controls the means of communication. Yeah. So like look what's happening in Eswatini, like internet's down, social media's
Yeah.
down, borders are being
Can I-
Yeah.
being
Look, in the States also, I think people believe like the States is like this kind of semi-liberated space, but there's so much choking going on around the internet. Like, there's constantly stuff on the Senate floor going on around, like, what is the new legislation we can bring in to basically control what people have and don't have access to. There are certain websites that I used to access in South Africa to watch my pirate shit that I can't even. That's like completely blocked. Like the website is just a dead zone. The one thing I did want to say about like open source and all of that is I encountered someone during my brief stint on TikTok. There was this one person that I followed who was doing super interesting work around creating software for just various kinds of. He's a code writer, and a website developer, and a graphic designer. He does all of these things, but the one thing that he does as part of his personal practice of Black anarchism is to create software for free for people to use as alternatives to software that needs to be purchased. So he was like raising
Nice.
funds and trying to get up, but it was like really a mode to operate outside of capitalism and also to operate outside of the state. So like very independent of any state regulatory bodies, and also very independently of any private corporations who might want to buy in or crush his project.
And that's practical stuff like that. That is like hands-on practical things that people can use
Yeah.
now. Like I can get the link, I can go to this, and I can use this. And I think like we always come back to the theory and the practical. It needs to work together because the theory informs a way in which things need to be done, and or why it needs to be done. And the practical is like, okay, this is how it is done. Like this is the tools now. This is like let's hit the ground.
I know
It's
Aiden.
awesome.
I know Aiden needs to say something, but I just want to say it's always hilarious to me how we start off with a main topic and we end up like, it's entirely related. I'm not saying it's unrelated, but like it's none of us plan to end up with like free software as a pan-Africanist anarchist politic of empathy practice.
hence the intro in post. Hence the intro in post.
But we need to, like, as South
Eswatini.
Africans, if you are like still here with us, even if I'm saying South Africans, anybody, anywhere in the world, if you are still listening at this point, please tune into what's going on in Eswatini. The people are fighting against absolute monarchy, but within that, there are communist comrades who are operating out of South Africa. The Eswatini Communist Party is stationed in South Africa because they were banned, and they are making moves there. So those of you who are, kind of left-leaning communist socialist supporters, there's that you can go and find out about. There are people who are organizing among themselves in their communities, in their neighborhoods, to resist the oppression that they are under. Conditions are hard, conditions are violent, and state repression at the moment is at an all-time high. And I know this isn't, nobody in the government is listening to this in South Africa, but I feel like whoever is and can push their ward councillors, who can write and tweet and whatever to all the elected officials in your area and in your province. All of these people, like, we need to just be pressing all of our officials now. Like, that's the one thing that we can do. As both Aiden and Lee pointed out, there's so much trade going from South Africa into Eswatini, and that might be a mechanism that we could use to really stop the killing of individuals who are only exercising their right to exist as a human being in the country that they were born in. So
I mean, it might be useful for us to go and just to include in the show notes, perhaps there's some spaces people could donate or somehow contribute financially to the cause. I don't know if there is
Try to find
like
some legit ones,
practical examples of, because right now, I mean, I don't know what people need on the ground, but that might be a something to think about.
yeah,
Kind of
Organizers will
actual,
know.
yeah.
yeah,
But
well,
that's something I can go and see. Maybe I can go do some
yeah,
research and come back to everyone.
yeah. Let's check
Awesome.
and see what we can do, and then add it to the show notes. Add it to the YouTube notes. Maybe can put a live link in the YouTube video or something like that. I don't know. But somehow it will be linked somewhere. Also follow us on Twitter, JXC Podcast, because I try and update like opinion stuff, but also maybe interesting articles or anything like that.
It's
But for the
beautiful
next,
stuff.
for the next couple of weeks, I think I'll just dedicate the space to Eswatini and South Africa and solidarity stuff. So yeah.